Much, Professor. Yes. Like you had, my name is Alison Kelly, and I work together with Professor Nganga on this project, and we're so excited to have you here. I am also a storyteller. I am an African art enthusiast, and I also have a podcast of my own where I interview visual artists in Kenya. So I am personally very excited about today's presentation. So I will go ahead and introduce today's speaker. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, Njeri Wangarĩ is a poet, a storyteller, and communication specialist whose work and interests focus on the intersection between technology, art, culture, media, and children's folklore in Africa. Wangarĩ is the founder of Afrokidz, a trust that promotes African children's folklore. Their goal is to record, archive, and creatively revise folklore and to promote storytelling through our Tusome Hadithi podcast and the Children Lit Club initiatives. Wangari has over 15 years of professional experience in the creative writing and communications industries with strong expertise in spoken word poetry, fiction and nonfiction writing, digital and content marketing, as well as strategic communications and public relations. Wangari is also a seasoned speaker and a contributing writer to Coda Story, Al Jazeera, The Elephant, and Global Voices. Help me welcome Njeri Wangarĩ. Karibu Njeri.
Thank you so much, Alison. And I committed the the scene that I think every speaker sometimes forgets to unmute the mic and starts speaking. So thank you so much. I am equally excited to be speaking to you today, for me, this topic that we will be talking about is something that I'm passionate about. The two topics that I'm quite passionate about, which are storytelling and African languages. So I will go right into my presentation, and my presentation is a question that we will spend the next 14 minutes or so answering. And the question is, can podcasting be used to preserve African folklore and indigenous languages? So that's a question that, I asked myself some years back. And what I will take you through is how exactly we've been able to do that. So, all right, there we go. Great. So as Africans, we have been passing on knowledge for millennia, instilling values and entertainment. We have been telling stories orally, and this has been happening and this has been ongoing since, since the dawn of civilization. And for a lot of us, myself and those from my generation and older, the quiet nights and sitting around the fireplace, with our grandmothers and with our aunties. It was mostly our grandmothers who would take on this role of storytelling as we waited for the food to cook, and that's the time that a lot of these stories were passed on from one generation to another. So here we have the story of the hyena and the hare. I think these were the sort of arch rivals in every African story. And I think some of us in the audience can relate and would sort of think of not just one or two or probably three stories that they have heard of the hare and how cunning it was, and the hyena and how greedy and selfish the hyena was. And a lot of these stories, a lot of them were meant to instill values of don't be a hyena, don't be like the hyena, or don't be like the, the hare, because sometimes the hare was cocky. So a lot of these stories, again, we had they were in our mother tongue. All right. And so that is one way in which our languages, our native languages, were passed on from one generation to another. And with that, not just the stories that were shared, but also the proverbs, the rhymes, and folklore, basically. Now, so what has been happening is that most African indigenous languages are on the brink of becoming extinct. And the prediction that was made by the book Africa's Endangered Languages, published in 2017, is that by the year 2100, approximately 201 languages will have become extinct. And with anywhere between 1,000 and 2,000 languages, Africa is home of approximately 1/3 of the world's languages. But what we are seeing is, whereas yes, Africa is the home of most of the world's languages, the flip side of that is that a lot of these languages are becoming extinct. So we are seeing that approximately 308 are highly endangered. That's about 12% of African languages. And the causes really are the delegitimization and devaluation of the language. And this goes way back to the colonial period, colonial and post-colonial Africa. During the colonial period, that is the time that a lot of children were discouraged, especially those who were brought into the education system. So the whole essence of education was to teach them English, because English was seen as the language of development, the language of civilization. And so a lot of, and this cuts across not just Kenya, but across Africa, African languages were delegitimized. And so even in post-colonial Africa, we have seen the same passed on with the school system. And also because of urbanization, again, we're seeing that English has become the first or the only language of use in the digital world. And lately, we've seen the elevation of Kiswahili at the expense of indigenous languages. And here it is not to sort of downplay the importance of Kiswahili, but what we have been seeing from the research that has been done is that Kiswahili has now become the sort of de facto African language. And so a lot of resources, even with digitization and things like that, is a lot of effort is being put towards Kiswahili, but not African languages. Now coming closer home, the native languages that we have in Kenya, there are 60 different languages that are indigenous to Kenya, and nearly 60% of those sampled in a research that came out last year by Professor Njeri Wangarĩ from the London School of Oriental and African Studies found that 60% of those of the sampled respondents from the capital city do not speak their mother tongue, and neither do their parents speak at home. And the same research found that 6 languages have become extinct already, and 16 are at serious risk of disappearing. So the ones that have disappeared are the ones that have listed there. And again, from the research findings, again by Dr. Njeri Wangarĩ, the parents who were interviewed, who were spoken to, say that Kenya's Ministry of Education, though it has approved the development of learning materials in 18 indigenous languages from nursery to grade 3, a lot of these parents found that curriculum to be ineffective in teaching of indigenous languages. In some instances, the parents said they found that the teachers were not competent. In a lot of the cases, because this research was done in Kiambu, a lot of the schools, because of the cosmopolitan nature, a lot of the schools opted to teach Kiswahili because of the nature of the children who are attending school. And so for me, the moment that I stopped looking at statistics and began seriously thinking about, okay, so this is what the situation is. What can I do about it? I think for me, it began with this book called Jabanene na Baadhi ya Madhagu, which basically is Kikuyu for Jambanene and the Flying Bus. It's a book that was written by Professor Ngugi wa Thiong'o and published in 1995. It's a children's storybook about this character called Njambanene. It's written in the Kikuyu language. Kikuyu language is one of the languages spoken in Kenya. And because I am a mother of 3, and one of the things that I have always loved doing from the time that my children were young to now, because they are 13, 11, and 8 respectively, is that I have always enjoyed reading storybooks to them. And not just storybooks, I have always been conscious about them knowing their mother tongue. So from the time that they were young, even I think when they were still in my belly, I'd sing to them Kikuyu Nasai rhymes. And so I've always been very intentional about teach them knowing their mother tongue. And one of the ways that I found would help is finding storybooks that I'm able to read to them. Now, what happened was that with this book, because it is only available, the version that I have is in Kikuyu, although the book has an English translation, which is what I have mentioned is Njambanene and the Flying Bus. There is an English translation. I found this version to have much more depth when it came to how the story is narrated. And so what I would do is that I would read the story in Kikuyu, but then do an immediate translation. So like I'd read a small paragraph in Kikuyu and then do the translation and think up the translation as I went in English. And the kids were really fascinated by it. Even now, they still remember the story of Njambanene. And that planted a seed, and it got me wondering, what if we could do that to other stories that have been written in native languages? What if what if I could do this at a larger scale and not just with my children? And so the question of podcasting and the concept of podcasting is something that I had experimented with before I began Kenyan Poets Podcast a while back, I think in 2009, and I have been active in the podcasting space. And in the last 5 years or so, Kenya has become one of the 3 countries currently experiencing a rapid podcasting growth. There has been exponential growth, largely because of availability of internet connection. The technology is readily available. There's Kenyans generally love experimenting. And so when this technology came about, naturally, a lot of young people gravitated towards that. But then what I noticed is that despite there being very many podcasts, very few were dedicated to storytelling for children. Actually, not just storytelling, there were very few podcasts for children. And so borrowing from what I had been doing with the Kenyan Poet Podcast and other podcasts that I had featured in, I think it would be good to mention the Sharks Chronicles, because it's also working towards the growth of Indigenous languages, but now this is through a different form of storytelling to an older generation. So that is why I thought about podcasting, and also looking at the case of podcasting. So when you look at the demographic, we have 400 million children and youth under the age of 18 in Africa. 74% of Kenyans watch TV and 46% have access to the internet. Again, there's a growing demand for kids' content from Africa, both from at a local perspective and also at a global scale. Then the perception, I think that I talked about, the teaching of Indigenous languages in the CBC curriculum is crucial, but then there's a lack of resources. And so what you'll find is that, yes, whereas that subject has been designated in every level from nursery to grade 3. A lot of those teachers don't have the resources, and so a lot of the times the children don't even get to learn. So having looked at the landscape, these are some of the podcasts that I came across. The African folktales, stories my mother told, Baganire, which is from Uganda, the African folktales. And most of this, the storytelling is done in English, with the exception of Baganire, which whereas the stories are told in the Luganda, I hope I'm getting that right. There are no translations, and so it becomes hard for a child who doesn't understand the language to enjoy the stories. And so why Tusome Hadithi? Now, Tusome Hadithi came about, it's a children's storytelling podcast, and I will tell you more details about it in the next slide. But the reason why I, myself and my partner arrived at a podcast called Children's Storytelling Podcast called Tusome Hadithi was because we found that the African children lacked representation in the storybooks that they read and the content that they watched or listened to. And the term I love using is the Disneyfication of of content online. So you'll find that there's a lot of content that uses the Disney style of storytelling, with a very Western idea behind it, Western characters, and so. Again, there are few to no modern stories written and told in African indigenous languages. Then again, there's been very little investment in preserving of African languages. Little investment has been put in quality children's digital content. So what we found is that a lot of the content that was there wasn't good quality. So here you have you're competing for a child's attention. They've been spoiled by the Nickelodeons and the Disneys of this world, and you want to give them content that is of a lower quality. Children will not go for that. Again, there was little content on TV and streaming platforms that was specifically around African stories. And the last was that African children's folklore is getting lost for not being recorded and digitized. So those are some of the things that sort of created very good basis for us to say, okay, so these are the problems that we're looking to solve. And so the pilot. So in 2021, the organization that I ran, which is Afrokidz and Lens Afrique, we piloted Tusome Hadithi, a children's storytelling audio and video podcast that featured African celebrities and well-known personalities reading African children's books by writers of African descent in the continent and from the diaspora, alongside creatively produced illustrations. Now, how we went about this is, as I said, there's a problem that we're looking to solve. We knew the quality, we knew we wanted to do a podcast, but we were also cognizant of the fact that children are drawn to visuals a lot more than audio. So we wanted to produce a podcast that would engage children both actively and passively. And actively was that they can actually sit down in front of a TV with their parents or using a tablet and watch the story told the story told, or if let's say they were driving somewhere and the parent could actually put on the podcast in an audio format from a streaming platform like Spotify, and they'll be able to listen passively. So the task then was, we had zero budget. We were bootstrapping everything. We were for the project, and we were looking to do a pilot of at least 5 episodes. So we needed to find the narrators. So and that I think that was the hardest. That was the hardest part. Because sourcing stories, we were able to do that. We were able to source for the stories from a website called stories.org, africanstories.org, which is a Creative Commons website. But convincing the personalities to come on board was the hardest bit. But we were able to do that, and the buy-in was the fact that this was a not-for-profit initiative that we were doing. We were going to release the podcasts to the public domain, and people would be able to consume, that there was no commercial aspect. And I think that was what helped convince many of the personalities to come on board. And so we shot the, again, for a lot of these spaces, because we had goodwill. If you look at the video at the photo at the top, I don't know if my cursor can move above. Sorry, where my cursor is pointing, that is at the National Library, Kenya National Library Service. For those who are familiar with the space in Upper Hill, there's a very beautiful library there. So we went. I've been a member in the parents group because they usually have monthly children's events, and so I appealed to them, and they gave us the space. They were able to give us the space for free, but we also promised to acknowledge them. The space below is called Cheche Bookshop. It's a very it's a bookshop based in Lavington, that specializes in African literature, particularly from African women. And so again, we went to them, appealed to them, kindly let us shoot the video here, and they were gracious enough to allow us to do that. And so whenever we could be able to sort of call in a favor and name drop anything like that, we did, and we were able to shoot the pilot. And so I wanted to give you a teaser of what we were able to come up with.
Welcome to Tusome Hadithi. Welcome to Tusome Hadithi. Welcome to Tusome Hadithi. Welcome to Tusome Hadithi, where we celebrate our African heritage through the storybooks we read.
So that was the teaser that we began with. As we began the marketing and just letting people, there's something that we've been working on, and it's called Tusome Hadithi, and it's about sharing stories and through the storybooks that we read. And the first episode that we released in April of 2022 was a story of the curious baby elephant, told in the Ma language, or the Maasai language, which is basically a story about about a baby elephant that was curious about why they had a short nose. And for this, we reached out to musician, and she's a multifaceted artist, musician called Silayo. And I knew Silayo from her music. I knew she was very passionate about her Maasai heritage and the Ma language, and we were able to bring her on board, and we were able to shoot that particular episode. And she was really excited because she knew that now she'd be able to dedicate the story to her nephews and nieces and every Maasai child out there, with the hope that such stories told in her mother tongue would spark a fire in them to learn and take pride in their identity and culture as Maasais. And it was really beautiful to be able to have the artists come in and take this as and own this, and see what role this podcast was playing, and what part they were playing in this podcast coming together. Now, the other episode that or maybe just to give you a teaser of the...
Welcome to Tusome Hadithi, where we celebrate our African heritage through the storybooks that we read. My name is Silayo, and I'm going to be reading Olguo Olodome Oigiligwanisho, written by Judith Baker and Lorato Truck. Olguo Olodome Oigiligwanisho is the story of the curious baby elephant. I shall be reading it in the Ma language, or Kimasai. Make sure that you listen closely for the sound of the drum beats. The drum beats will sound when I say the special word of the story. Listen all the way to the end to find out if you guessed the special word right. All right then, let's get started. Everyone knows that the elephant has a very long nose. Nage, ora bana kick off nage sabok engumoldome. Enyanyuye enamuge na dia mpolo sengo bomo. But a long time ago, the elephant's nose was short and fat, like a shoe right in the middle of its face.
So I won't let the whole video play. It is available on YouTube. If you after this, if you head on to YouTube and look for Tusome Hadithi, you will be able to watch the whole episode. But that was just to give you an idea of how we thought about the packaging everything from the audio to the dramatic reading to the illustrations to the sound effects. We really had to think through that, because knowing children, they have a very short attention span. If there's something that is not dazzling, it's not captivating, children are bound to switch off. And so we really needed to bring in all those factors together, so that there's the illustration bit that looked animated on a shoestring budget. We needed to gamify it, and so that's why you hear Silayo saying, listen out to the sound of the drum beat and try and guess which word, and make sure that you listen all the way to the end to see if you guess the word right. And so what that did is that it would make children listen to the whole episode, so that towards the end they are able to tell, were they able to know the magic word of the magic word of the story. So we did that with all the episodes. Episode 2, we did a story in Kikamba, and we featured a media personality called Chipukizi.
Welcome to Tusome.
All right. And then episode 4, we had a story done in the Luo language by a well-known Kenyan musician, very talented musician, Susanna Owiyo. And again, she read the story of Sizo, a boy named Simon, describing his friends in the Luo. And I haven't gone through the analytics, but sorry, if I could go back to the analytics, which we shall look at later. There we had very good. We were able to get a very good reception for. If I could skip to particularly this episode. If you look at the analytics, this has been our most watched video of all the videos that we released in episode 1. The first episode that we released, it has so far had 9,000 views on YouTube and 300 plays on Spotify. The one by Chipukizi, the story in Kikamba, has had 1,000 views. And then we have Susan Owiyo, 2,002. Seeing who our audiences were. A lot of the audience, especially for the audio, from Kenya, United States, and Germany. We also had some bit of listenership from Egypt and United Kingdom. For the, again, looking at the gender representation as well as the age, we mostly had female between the ages of 28 to 34. Then looking at the YouTube viewership, so far, the videos for the pilot have had 12,500 views with a watch time of 67.1 hours. And again, looking at the gender distribution as well as geographical distribution, most of our viewers, interestingly, were from France, Senegal, and Cote d'Ivoire. And these are for the YouTube. These are for the YouTube videos, and most of them were female. Now, when we wrapped up season 1, we were able to get funding last year, towards the end of last year, from Africa No Filter to start production of season 2. However, season 2 is only going to be audio only. And so what we wanted to do, we didn't want to go to the same language communities. We wanted to have stories from other language communities. And so what we did is that we did a call for submissions. We asked those who are storytellers and they're passionate about their language to submit, and they can fluently speak these languages: Samburu, Kiembu, Taita, Sabawot, Lulogoli. All those languages, we asked them to submit a 2-minute audio with of themselves narrating a short story in any indigenous of the above indigenous languages with an English translation. And the response was overwhelming. We were able to get submissions for all the languages that we had indicated, apart from Pokot. Sorry, Samburu. Samburu is where we were not able to get any submissions, but all the others were able to get at least 3 storytellers submitting their audio submissions. So we are, as I mentioned, we are producing 8 audio stories, 2 from each of the following indigenous Kenyan communities, that is Kiembu, Lubukusu from the Bukusu community, Sagala, and Ulogoli from Maragoli. Now, the challenges that we faced when, putting together, producing, because we are currently producing season 2, we will be doing the studio recordings next week. The challenge was sourcing stories and folklore. Again, ownership and custodianship of traditional folklore. I think that was the other challenge that we faced. Funding to record, since 2022, we have been fundraising. It's only last year, towards the end of last year, that we were able to raise some funds. And again, they're for audio only. We were not able to get funds because video production is quite expensive. So from the grant that we were able to get from Africa No Filter, we can only do audio. But the biggest challenge has been being able to get funding to be able to record, archive, and creatively revise folklore like we did with season 1. Also finding narrators. As I mentioned, actually we were not able to get narrators from the Pokot, Samburu, and Taita communities. And that is it from me. I have rushed through my presentation. I was quite conscious of time, but also because I would like to open this up to questions. I'd like to hear questions from you, and for us to have a discussion about how feasible this is. What are some of the learnings that we were able to get? I think one of the things that I didn't mention is that we moved away from the model of using media personalities for season 2, because what we realized is that we would not be able to get, say, a media personality who speaks Logoli or speaks Sagala or speaks Sabawot. And so, again, the other thing that one of the other learnings that we got from season 1 is that whereas we needed to get a buy-in from parents, hence the use of media personalities, and that worked very well. However, what we learned is that children don't really care about whether the person is a celebrity or not, as long as the story is captivating. So what we went for with season 2 is finding very talented storytellers who have a natural gift of storytelling, naturally able to be dramatic, employ all those stylistic devices that come with storytelling naturally, that we won't have to train them, because again, we don't have the funding to hold workshops and train the storytellers. And so that's one of the things that we learned, and we're using in season 2. And I think also the other learning has been reaching out to different language communities, so that we don't just get stories from the usual communities. And that the storytellers that we've been able to get are very talented. We're actually really excited to work with them, and also to also absorb them into the other programs that we are doing with the Children's Literary Club. Back to you, Professor or Alison.
Yes, thank you so much, Njeri, for your presentation. That was insightful, and I resonated with the section where you said about desensitization for those of us, me, who grew up in the city. I am a victim of the desensitization, but mostly it was because both my parents come from different tribes who don't really like, back in Ushago, our home countries, up country, they don't really see eye to eye. So because of the tensions that were around both sides of the family, being the firstborn, my parents decided that at home, we are just Kenyans, so they wanted to have like a more peaceful space where they can just speak either English or Swahili. So there wasn't much, I didn't learn much when it came to like traditional folklore or even the languages because they wanted a safe space. But when everything died down, I can say now my younger brother maybe got more engaged. So I am also a victim of desensitization, which yeah, I'm really grateful for this podcast. I can also learn from it. I'm not a kid, but I would be interested to listen to the stories to learn more about my culture. Yeah, so I would like to. Oh, you have something to say?
No, I just wanted to say that your experience is very similar. It's an unfortunate experience, and it's quite similar with a lot of families, and that's one of the things that a lot of Kenyans have gone through. That for a lot of families, the question of language has become quite political. And again, during the like every election season, language becomes or speaking, local languages becomes politicized, and a lot of the times it's when pitting one community against the other, and so for a lot of Kenyans, um most of them prefer just speaking Kiswahili. And so what is happening is that we are seeing a lot more parents opting to just, the bare minimum being their children learning Kiswahili. But then, when it comes now to their mother tongue, I think a lot of them just, parents speak to each other, but then to the children speak in Kiswahili or in English. And I think one of the things that I speak about, because I'm a huge advocate for this, is that we're not only losing the language, we're losing all the oral traditions and that come with it, because language is a carrier of culture. And so a lot of these traditions that we've upheld are being lost because we're no longer practicing the language. Yeah, that's all I wanted to mention.
Yeah, yeah. So thank you so much. Thank you for everyone who has joined us today. Feel free to, if you'd like to ask a question, you can raise your hand and that is how we'll proceed, or you can type it in the chats and I will read it out for you. So there is one question for you, Njeri, from Claire. I will probably butcher the rest of it. I'm sorry. Hello, thank you very much for your presentation. Would you be able to elaborate on the challenge of ownership and custodianship of traditional folklore that you mentioned towards the end?
Great. Thank you so much for that question. So by virtue of them being, of this folklore not having individual ownership, meaning a lot of these stories, the proverbs, the idioms belong to the community. When it comes now to the projects that we are doing, digitizing and creatively revising, it becomes one of the things that one of the challenges that we encountered is when you now collect these stories, because now in the community level, you will find that I'll give you an example, like the language community or the community that I come from, the Kikuyu, there is the Kikuyu Council of Elders. All right. So those have now sort of become the custodians. So anyone seeking to digitize folklore, it's like there are now gatekeepers for the community. So then now that becomes a bit of a challenge. Again, once we have collected the content and we have digitized, then does it still remain as part of the community, or do we now have a sense of ownership? Now, for us, what we opted to do is make it freely, available for the public to consume. But one of the challenges that we have encountered is the aspect of ownership of the stories. Yes, when you go to the different communities, you can't lay claim to it, but then once you have put it in the digital space, and if there are certain modifications that you have done, then the dynamics of, should you apply, do you need to apply copyright, or do you put it back in the Creative Commons space? So one of the things that we saw with the stories that we used in season 1 was that a lot of these stories have been put in the Creative Commons space. And so as I mentioned, there's a africanstories.org is an organization that does that, where writers and storytellers go onto the platform, whether it's stories that they've collected from the communities, they are able to put them on that platform, and translators from other countries across Africa are able to translate those stories into their languages. So like the story that Silayo read in the Ma language was initially written, I think, in Xhosa. And so someone put it in Xhosa language on that platform. Then there was a Kenyan Maasai who now went onto the platform and decided to give a translation of that story in the Ma language. So that's one of the things that we're seeing, and I think it makes a case for Creative Commons. And so what we're actually looking at doing is a lot of the stories that we collect and digitize, to put them in the to have them under Creative Commons. And I think that's the way to go for folklore. Because again, going back to the question of ownership, because it's something that you received from the community, then it is important that you give it back to the community. I hope I've responded to that question adequately.
Thank you so much, Njeri. Claire can confirm if she's satisfied with the response. Maybe she can ask another question. We have another question from Grant McNulty. I hope I'm saying that. Oh, Claire has said, thank you. Yeah, everything's fascinating, and congratulations for wonderful work. Okay, thank you, Claire. The next question from Grant, he says, thank you for the presentation, Njeri. In our experience, doing digital cultural work in Southern Africa, there are large and growing audiences for this type of content, but the question of sustainability looms large. Do you have any ideas to keep the project going beyond grant funding?
Ooh, unfortunately, I don't. And so I've been on the other end of the spectrum. Before Tusome Hadithi, there was a project that I piloted back in 2013, 2014, called Safari Tales. And those familiar with the work that I've been doing in the children's space, children's content space, because I've been doing this for quite a while. Actually, it's the second time that I'm getting back into the space. Safari Tales had tried the commercial model, because we had seen relying on grants would only get us so far. And so right from the get-go, Safari Tales, we had looked at it being a storytelling mobile app where children could access, but then it was a freemium model where children would access certain stories free of charge, but then they would need to pay to unlock certain features or additional stories. So the app had short stories, it had nursery rhymes, it had proverbs, tongue twisters. And so certain aspects of the app were free, but then children needed to, or the parent needed to unlock the others, and hence the freemium model. Unfortunately, that did not work. And so what we have seen with cultural-based content, unfortunately, the only model that has worked for us, and I've seen for a lot for other players in the space, is relying on grant. Because again, it goes back to what else, the question that I was responding to Claire on around ownership, and can you commercialize traditional knowledge? That has been the question that a lot of us in this space have been grappling with, because we don't want to go to the we don't want to sort of put on the capitalistic mentality of, yes, we need to be able to make money from this, but then again, how again does it become sustainable? So that's a question that we're still grappling with.
Thank you, Njeri. Grant, you can let us know if she has sufficiently answered your question. You can continue writing questions in the chat or raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question.
Alison,
I have a, yes?
go ahead with yours and I'll go next.
Oh.
Mhm.
I had a question when you mentioned the stories. Acquiring the stories is a challenge. There's like limited resources in terms of the folklores. I was thinking, have you considered, or would you consider carrying out a research project, like going into the communities? Because a lot of these stories probably lie with the grandmothers and the mothers who basically never left home, and are the ones not entitled, but like carrying the story forward. Would you consider maybe going into these communities as a research project to now get like fresh stories or stories that have not yet been written down? Or yeah.
I love that question, because and you saw me nodding so much when you are as you are arriving at your question, because initially, when we were piloting season 1 of Tusome Hadithi, the plan was to go to the community and get the stories from there. But we quickly realized we need equipment, we need resources, we need to have a team, because when you're going to that grandmother, you will need to get there. So there's the transport cost. There you need equipment, you need a recorder. And all those things cost money. So we had to work with the low-hanging fruit. And the low-hanging fruit there's an organization that has already collected these stories. Can we now use those stories? Because we needed proof of concept. We needed to prove that it is possible to make an interesting children's podcast in African languages, because that had not been done before. Before we produced our podcast, the ones that had been there before, as I said, were primarily of stories told in English, and the ones told in indigenous languages. Some of them, there was certain challenges with either the quality of audio, how well it was able to bring in the different aspects that capture a child's attention. And so, not to deviate from your question, but those are some of the considerations that we make. But I did go to my community. I actually went to my former nursery school teacher. I did, and she wrote for me the nursery rhymes that we learned in nursery schools, the tongue twisters, the stories that she could remember. I also went to unfortunately my maternal grandmother passed on, but the grandparents and the shoshos in the community, I was able to do that, but at a very small scale. But that is not scalable, because again, if you want to go to other language communities, then you would need to be able to get you need to have some funding for that, or there's a lot more resources required. But just to answer your question, yes, actually that's the way to go. Because again, what we've seen is that by relying on the existing stories, yes, you are going to get stories that have been beaten to death. The story I think the one that was very common was the story of the hawk and the chicken, where the hawk, lent, the razor to the chicken, and then the chicken lost it. And that is why the hawk always grabs the chicks from the chicken just to revenge. That story, we encountered it from very many communities, the same story, and now that becomes the danger. And what now we are losing is very authentic and not previously told stories from different communities that are quite unique.
All right, thank you so much. That answers my question. Professor Nganga, will you go first, or do I give it to Grant?
Grant, go ahead.
Thank you. Sorry, my connection was a bit bad, so I tapped before and I haven't, I'm sitting closer to the router. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Firstly, thank you for the presentation and your response, Njeri. I was wondering, I take your point about trying to, or looking at modes to commercialize traditional knowledge. But in my experience working in South and Southern Africa, you mentioned that, many of the stories seem to be the same. But in my experience, there's quite a bit of variability in terms of the characters and in terms of maybe not the narrative, but for children's stories, there might be a mix of ogres and mongoose and many other characters that can change depending on the teller. So I wonder, I mean, if I think about, how to perhaps to make these projects sustainable, could you not, for example, go to one person and say, well, this is the version that I recorded from this person, and they were compensated for it, and then you could, I don't know, do something like there are multiple, I suppose, options like premium models or paid access or advertising or something like that, which would then contribute to the longevity and the economic sustainability of the project at large. I don't know if that, how that resonates with you, but to say, for example, I know another example, not to do just with children's folktales, but in Zulu-speaking culture in Osa as well, we have things called Izidugo and Isithakazelo, which are clan histories. And of course, those are open to interpretation to some degree, but by, again, the teller. And there are, of course, multiple versions that that put some people on a pedestal and do the opposite for others, depending on I suppose which side of the family you're on, etc., etc. I wonder if that is similar or not the same in East Africa, or at least where you're from.
Njeri, before you answer, Grant, thanks, Grant, for your question. Mine is actually a follow-up on that. So Njeri, you've worked quite a bit with what's, I guess I would say is performance and music, especially writing about music festivals. And Grant mentioned advertising, which is a key part of like music festivals, sponsorships, etc. I'm wondering whether that could be a model moving forward for Tusome Hadithi, right? Product placement. You do have these kids and their parents' attention for however long the podcast is running, placing advertisements in their sponsorship. Might that be another way to to make the project economically sustainable beyond grants? Yeah, curious to hear what you think.
I think what I have seen work is a hybrid. So I'll give an example of Akili. I don't know how many are familiar with Akili. Akili, it's children's digital content company based in Tanzania, and it has been there for quite a while. And a lot of the content that they produce is in Kiswahili. And the model that they have used, whereas initially, so they have been relying on grants and at the same time looking at other sustainable models. And so the YouTube viewership, views and being able to sort of do advertising on YouTube has worked. I have seen that model work, but initially getting them off the ground, they relied a lot on grants. All right. And so, but the other model that I have seen work is where they're able to partner, like let's say with organizations, especially in the NGO space, like let's say an organization that wants to sensitize children about hygiene, cleaning their hands. And so what I saw is that they were able now to come up with an episode where the character, Akili, within the aspects of the story, there's an aspect where the character washes their hands and they make they put that as they add that, they embed that as part of the story in a very natural way. So I've seen that. Advertising as a model is a bit tricky because advertisers look for numbers. All right. So here you're competing with other content. So let's say whether it is on the podcast audio on Spotify, they look at a number of listens. Same with YouTube, how many viewerships, how many views do you have? And by the time you reach those numbers, you will need to have, been fundraising or be able to get other sources of income for advertising to become a sustainable revenue model. But yes, I have seen it work, but you need a critical mass.
Okay, thank you, Njeri. I hope, yes, Nana?
Yeah, no, that makes sense, Jenny. I was going to say earlier, what's the word? And I think you made a case earlier you made a really good case for hosting residencies and workshops for storytelling, right? To then pipeline folks who do the narration and do the storytelling for future episodes, which I think would be a really cool project.
Yes, there's a lot of potential out there. There's raw talent, but it does need to be honed.
Mm-hmm. Alison.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. We have 2 questions from the chat. The first one is from Wamboi. She says, hello everyone, Wamboi here, an African writer currently published on Amazon KDP. Podcasting is an amazing way to sustain our stories, but to keep the stories live, we need to create a culture that will take us to the tradition of storytelling again, something that will create a pattern and sort of repetition, as repetition is one way that our folklore and language has been able to move forward with each generation. So where do we start that tradition of storytelling again? Yes, to you, Njeri.
Exactly what we're doing with podcasting. You see, podcasting is basically, it's like we're at a fireplace, but now the fireplace is what? Is the phone or the TV screen, and we're all huddled there. But we are consuming, and then it's being told, and all the styles that our grandmothers would use of posing for drama and starting with, let's say, hadithi, which is story, and then the children would respond, story come or hadithi njo. Those are some of the oral aspects of storytelling that podcasting has enabled us to do. And the beauty with podcasting is that, not all the children have to be at one specific location. for them to listen to their grandmother wherever they are, whether it is in Kenya or wherever or in the US or Europe or wherever they are able to listen. But I think what the question probably I would explore further is beyond children consuming storytelling in the form of podcasting is the books, because I did mention that there are very few books written in African languages. Again, what we're seeing that a lot. And so if we could have a case where, and it sort of becomes sort of like the norm, where as a writer, you've written a children's book or you've done a podcast, but then think of the extending that beyond the audio. How now do you curate that in the form of a book? Can that story in the form of a podcast be customized to be in the form of a book, so that you're able now to engage the child in the different aspects of their lives? So whether it is when they're listening, or when they're watching, or when their parents have enforced screen time and they actually need to read a book. Yeah, so that's the way to think about it.
Yeah, hi, Wamboy here. When I was writing the question, thank you for this opportunity. When I was writing the question, what I meant is, like, when you said you read your kids' books and you created that tradition, and also do the same with my daughter. I am trying to read her books and teach her everything, but that is not what is happening within the societal level. You get that there are parents who are never readers,